The 1970s were a roller coaster time for American cars, as manufacturers tried to juggle style, performance, and fuel efficiency. These cars became infamous for their flaws. Let's dive into the 15 most horrendous American cars of the 70s that left drivers regretting their purchase. 15. Pontiac Astray. The Pontiac Astray was so forgettable that even its own owners couldn't remember what they liked about it. Released in 1975, this car was meant to be a stylish compact alternative to the Chevy Vega, but it couldn't meet up with the lofty aspirations. It was a cheap, basic car with a design that was plain at best. The exterior was uninspiring, and the interior was full of low-quality materials that made it feel like a car built for the budget-conscious, but with no effort to make it feel comfortable or nice to drive. The engine options were underpowered, making acceleration sluggish and driving a dull experience. Handling was also clunky, and the ride quality was rough. Like its sibling, the Chevy Vega, the Astra suffered from frequent mechanical issues, especially with its rust-prone body. Many owners found themselves stuck with costly repairs, and the car quickly gained a reputation for being a frustrating and unreliable choice. 14. Mercury Bobcat released. In 1975, it was supposed to be a more refined version of the Ford Pinto, but it ended up being just as bad, if not worse. The Bobcat's most glaring issue was its lack of originality. It was essentially a rebranded Pinto with a few minor tweaks, but it still carried all the same flaws. The car had a cheap, boxy design that didn't stand out, and its cramped interior was filled with uncomfortable, low-quality materials. The small engine options were weak, and the car's overall performance was sluggish. Acceleration was slow, and the ride was stiff, making it feel more like a chore to drive than anything enjoyable. The Bobcat had issues with rust and mechanical failures, with many owners reporting breakdowns after just a few years. 13. Buick Skyhawk. The Buick Skyhawk was so disappointing that it quickly became the punchline of many jokes in the 1970s. Released in 1975, it was meant to be a sporty, compact car for a new generation. Instead, it turned out to be a clumsy and underwhelming attempt at capturing the youthful market. It had a bland, uninspired look that made it stand out for all the wrong reasons. It was neither sporty nor stylish, and the boxy shape didn't do it any favors. Performance-wise, the Skyhawk failed to impress. It came with a weak four-cylinder engine that struggled to deliver any real power, and the handling was sloppy at best. The car just wasn't fun to drive. The Skyhawk's reliability was also a major issue. Owners reported frequent mechanical problems. In the end, it was a car that promised excitement, but delivered frustration instead. 12th Oldsmobile Omega. Released in 1973, it was part of GM's effort to compete in the compact car market. But the Omega's blandness and poor execution made it one of the most disappointing cars of the 70s. From the outside, the Omega didn't stand out in any way. It was a boxy design that failed to make an impression. Inside, it was even worse. The seats were uncomfortable, and the dashboard looked like something pulled out of a much cheaper car. Performance was another letdown. The Omega's engine options were weak, with the base four-cylinder barely able to get the car moving. Even the V6 upgrade couldn't make it feel any faster or more exciting to drive. What made the Omega truly horrendous, though, was its reliability. For a car that was supposed to offer practicality, it ended up being a headache for many owners. Our number one pick is a car so horrendous that it is known for exploding. Watch to the end to get the details. Don't forget to hit the like icon and share. Your action means a lot to us. 11. Lincoln Versailles. The Lincoln Versailles was often called the poor man's Mercedes, but the joke wasn't funny. Introduced in 1977, it was Lincoln's attempt to enter the luxury sedan market at a lower price. But what they delivered was a confusing mess. The Versailles was essentially a rebranded Ford Granada, and that's where the problems began. It tried to look like a high-end luxury car, but its budget origins were glaringly obvious. The exterior styling was awkward, and the interior was filled with cheap materials that didn't belong in a luxury vehicle. The Versailles came with engines that lacked the power expected from a luxury car, and its ride quality felt more like a standard sedan than a smooth, upscale experience. The handling was unrefined, making it uncomfortable to drive. Electrical issues, transmission problems, and rust quickly became common complaints among owners. What was meant to be an affordable luxury car ended up being a poorly executed, disappointing experience. The Versailles did little to help Lincoln's reputation and was quickly forgotten by the public. 10. Plymouth Volare. The Plymouth Volare was so poorly made that many owners joked about the car's mystical ability to break down just after the warranty expired. Introduced in 1976, the Volare was Chrysler's move to compete in the mid-size market, but it quickly became a lesson in how not to design a car. The Volare's biggest issue was its lack of reliability. Despite being marketed as a practical family car, it had engine problems and transmission failures. After just a few years on the road, many owners found themselves dealing with breakdowns and repairs. The Volare's suspension system was uncomfortable at best, making every bump in the road feel like a shock to the system. The car's design was also uninspired, with a boxy shape that looked outdated even when it was new. Inside, the Volare's interior felt cheap, with low-quality materials that didn't age well. Even the seats were uncomfortable, and the overall feel was far from the smooth ride that people expected from a mid-size car. 9. AMC Pacer released. In 1975, the Pacer was AMC's bold move to create a futuristic, wide-bodied compact car. What they ended up with was a vehicle so bizarre, it became a rolling punchline. The Pacer had a big design flaw. While AMC thought the bubble-like shape was innovative, most people just thought it was weird. The oversized windows made the car heat up like a greenhouse in the summer, and its stubby, mismatched proportions made it look cartoonish. It was the kind of car you'd point at and laugh, not admire. Mechanically, the Pacer didn't fare much better. Its engines were underpowered and guzzled gas at a time when fuel efficiency was critical. Worse, the car was heavy, far heavier than its small size suggested, which meant sluggish acceleration and poor handling. Inside, the Pacer tried to be roomy, but its odd shape meant headroom and legroom were inconsistent. For a car meant to stand out, it succeeded, but for all the wrong reasons. 8. Chevrolet Chevette. The Chevrolet Chevette was once nicknamed Shove-It by frustrated owners who wanted to push it off a cliff rather than drive it. Introduced in 1976, it was Chevy's idea of a practical, budget-friendly car. Unfortunately, cheap became its defining feature in every sense of the word. The Chevette was marketed as fuel-efficient, but that came at a cost. Its tiny 1.4-liter engine produced a laughable 52 horsepower, which meant merging onto highways felt like a life-or-death situation. It wasn't just slow, it was painfully noisy, with vibrations that made it seem like the engine was begging for mercy. Build quality was another nightmare. The Chevette's interior was bare bones, with plastic so flimsy it seemed like it might crumble in your hands. The seats were uncomfortable, the dashboard was uninspiring, and even the basic features felt outdated. And let's not forget its tendency to rust prematurely, making a bad car even worse. Despite its low price, the Chevette was an exercise in frustration for drivers. 7th, Ford Mustang II. The Ford Mustang II was so unloved that some enthusiasts refused to even acknowledge it as a Mustang. Introduced in 1974, it was supposed to adapt the iconic muscle car to a world reeling from gas shortages. First, let's talk about the design. Gone were the sleek lines and aggressive stance of the original Mustang. The Mustang II looked like a bloated compact car, with none of the charm or edge that made its predecessor a legend. Ford tried to pitch it as sporty, but the tiny, underpowered engines told a different story. The base 2.3-liter four-cylinder wheezed out a mere 88 horsepower, and even the V8 option felt like it was holding back. Inside, the Mustang II wasn't much better. Cheap materials and cramped seating made it clear this car was more about cutting costs than creating an enjoyable ride. It also inherited quality control issues, with rattles, rust, and breakdowns becoming all too common. While the Mustang II sold well due to rising fuel prices, its reputation as a disappointment lingers. It's a Mustang in name only, and that's the nicest thing anyone can say about it. 6. Dodge Aspen. The Dodge Aspen was recalled so many times that it became a running joke. 7 major recalls in its first 3 years on the market. Introduced in 1976, the Aspen was supposed to replace Dodge's aging Dart with a more modern mid-size sedan. Instead, it became a symbol of how bad quality control could get. The Aspen's problems started before you even turned the key. Its body panels were poorly aligned, and rust began to eat away at the car almost immediately. Some models didn't even survive their first winter without significant corrosion. Then there was the suspension, which had a tendency to fail, making the car dangerous to drive. Performance wasn't much of a selling point either. While the Aspen offered a range of engines, even the more powerful options felt sluggish due to the car's excessive weight. And the smaller engines? They struggled to move the Aspen at all. Dodge tried to sell the Aspen as a practical family car, but with all its recalls and reliability issues, it became a nightmare for owners. 5. Cadillac Cimarron. The Cimarron was essentially a Chevrolet Cavalier with Cadillac badges slapped on it, and it didn't take long for people to notice. For a luxury car, it had nothing luxurious to offer. The interior felt cheap, with vinyl and plastics that didn't match Cadillac's reputation. Even the seats lacked comfort, making long drives a chore. Performance was another disaster. Its underpowered 4-cylinder engine struggled to deliver any excitement, and the handling felt more like a compact economy car than a high-end ride. The Cimarron was also outrageously overpriced, costing nearly twice as much as the Cavalier while offering almost no difference in quality. This car wasn't just a misstep for Cadillac, it was a complete faceplant. The Cimarron became a symbol of what happens when luxury brands cut corners, leaving a stain on Cadillac's reputation that took years to clean up. 4. Chrysler Cordoba. The Chrysler Cordoba was heavily marketed for its soft Corinthian leather, a term that became meaningless. Introduced in 1975, the Cordoba was Chrysler's attempt at a luxury coupe for the average buyer. What they delivered was a car that screamed excess but delivered mediocrity. The Cordoba's biggest issue was its bloated design. It was supposed to be a personal luxury car, but it felt more like driving a couch with wheels. Its massive size didn't translate to great handling. In fact, steering it felt like piloting a barge. Parking? Forget it. The car was awkwardly oversized for what it was trying to be. Under the hood, things didn't get much better. The engines were gas guzzlers, chugging fuel at every giving opportunity. And for all the luxury Chrysler promised, the Cordoba's build quality was disappointing. Plastic parts cracked, the electronics were unreliable, and its styling quickly looked outdated. The Cordoba sold well initially, thanks to clever marketing, but buyers quickly realized they were stuck with a flashy disappointment. It was more style over substance, if you could call it stylish. 3. Chevrolet Vega. Chevrolet's engineers discovered the Vega's aluminum engine could warp so badly, it turned into a glorified paperweight. Introduced in 1970, the Vega was supposed to be GM's answer to compact imports like the VW Beetle. Instead, it turned into one of the biggest automotive flops of the decade. Let's start with the engine. This was supposed to be innovative, using aluminum for lighter weight and better fuel efficiency. Instead, it overheated, warped, and consumed oil like it was a thirsty marathon runner. Reliability issues didn't stop there. The Vega's unprotected steel panels were prone to rust so severe that you'd see holes forming after just a couple of winters. Inside, the car wasn't any better. The interior materials felt more like cardboard than a car's interior. And if you expected decent performance, think again. The Vega's sluggish acceleration made merging onto highways a gamble. While the car sold well initially due to its low price, the Vega didn't just disappoint, it set the standard for how not to build a car. 2. AMC Gremlin. The AMC Gremlin was designed and built in just 6 months. Yes, that's how long it took to create one of the most awkwardly shaped cars in history. Released on April Fool's Day in 1970, this odd-looking compact car wasn't a prank. It was AMC's attempt to beat competitors in the small car market. Unfortunately, it became the punchline. The Gremlin's chopped-off rear end looked like someone forgot to finish designing the car. While AMC called it unique, most people just called it ugly. But its problems weren't skin-deep. The car's build quality was atrocious, flimsy materials, and poor assembly. Mechanically, it wasn't much better. The base models came with underwhelming engines that struggled to keep up with highway speeds, and reliability was a nightmare. Inside, the cramped cabin and lack of features made it feel like AMC wasn't even trying. It may have been cheap, but you got what you paid for, and not much more. The Gremlin might have been ahead of its time in creating compact cars, but its execution was so bad that it became a laughingstock. 1. Ford Pinto. Exploding gas tanks aren't exactly a feature you'd brag about, yet the Ford Pinto became infamous for just that. Released in 1971, the Pinto was Ford's attempt to create an affordable, compact car to rival imports. But in their rush to get it on the market, corners were cut, dangerously so. The Pinto's gas tank was poorly positioned near the rear bumper, and in rear-end collisions, it could rupture and ignite. To make matters worse, internal memos revealed that Ford knew about the defect, but calculated it would be cheaper to pay lawsuits than fix the design. Safety wasn't its only downfall. The Pinto's underpowered engines made for a sluggish ride, and its build quality screamed budget. Doors that didn't align properly, a cramped interior, and thin sheet metal gave it the feel of a tin can on wheels. Despite selling millions, the Pinto's reputation was irreparably damaged by the fiery controversy. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Until next time, stay safe.